You know, when we think about the biggest mysteries in the universe, we usually look up at the stars, black holes, distant galaxies. But what if the single greatest mystery of all is actually happening right now, inside your own head? It's the simple fact of your own subjective experience, and we're about to dive into a radical new way of explaining it.
I mean, really think about that for a second. The question sounds almost too simple, but it has stumped scientists and philosophers for centuries. It's not about what your brain is doing, the wiring, the chemicals. It's why all that processing creates this rich, private inner world. Why isn't it all just happening in the dark, like a computer with no screen? Well, a new theory is suggesting the answer isn't what we think, but how we're built.
So, according to this new idea, the value saturation theory, consciousness isn't some mysterious ghost that just pops out of the machine. It is the machine. Or, to be more precise, it's a very specific way of building it. The argument is that subjective experience is just what you get when you have a very particular biological architecture.
Now, to really get why this is such a big deal, you first have to appreciate the sheer size of the mountain this theory is trying to climb. For a long, long time, this puzzle has been called the single hardest problem in all of science. This is what the philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem. And it's this: we can map every single neuron firing, we can track every chemical reaction in the brain, but none of that explains the feeling of seeing the color red, or the taste of chocolate, or the sting of sadness. There's this massive gap between the physical stuff and the phenomenal feeling. And this is the gap value saturation aims to bridge, not with some new particle of force, but with a blueprint. Okay, so what's in this blueprint? Well, the theory says that subjective consciousness is built from 3 core architectural components, and they all have to be working together.
So let's break down this recipe. First, you need a deep, hardwired link between your body and your brain. Then you need the constant pressure of real life or death stakes. And finally, you need a perspective that becomes literally impossible to escape.
So first up is interoceptive binding. And this isn't some vague idea, it's a hardwired reality. Your brain isn't just a computer sitting in a skull, it is deeply and constantly tangled up with your body's internal signals. Every thought you have is kind of colored by the physical feeling of being you. This is the absolute foundation.
Next, we have homeostatic saturation. And honestly, this is a crucial point. For any biological system, for you and me, the stakes are real. Every decision has consequences that can't be undone. And this constant, underlying pressure to survive basically soaks every single mental process in a layer of genuine importance, of what the theory calls value.
And this comparison makes it crystal clear. Think about a cheetah. If it fails on a hunt, it's burned precious energy, and it faces the real risk of starvation. The consequences are irreversible. Now think about an AI. If it fails at a task, who cares? It's just a data point. It gets a reset and unlimited retries with zero real cost. That single difference, real stakes versus no stakes, the theory argues, is everything.
And that brings us to the final ingredient, perspectival entrapment. And this is where it gets a little mind-bending. Your brain is constantly building models of itself and the world. Eventually, it gets so complex that it starts to model its own modeling process. It gets caught in this recursive loop. The best way to think about it is, imagine you're not just the actor in a movie, but you're also the camera, the director, and the audience all at the same time. There's no way to step outside of that perspective because the very act of trying to step outside is just another scene in your own movie. You're architecturally trapped.
Okay, so we've got the 3 ingredients, but they don't just pop into existence overnight. The theory proposes that they actually come online in a very specific sequence as we grow up, building that conscious self piece by piece. But first, we gotta distinguish between 2 things, sentience and subjective consciousness. Sentience is just the raw feeling of stuff, like pain or pleasure. Subjective consciousness is the awareness that it is you, a self, that's having that feeling. The idea is that babies are sentient from birth, but that subjective consciousness, that sense of me, has to be built.
And we can actually map this out. At birth, an infant has the body-brain link, and the survival stakes are active. It feels pain, but it doesn't have a model of a self that's doing the feeling. Then, around 18 months, you get the famous mirror test, where a toddler starts using an external tool, their reflection, to build that self model. And finally, somewhere between 3 and 5 years old, that model becomes fully internalized. The mirror isn't needed anymore. The final ingredient, perspectival entrapment, clicks into place. And suddenly, it's not just pain, it's my pain.
All right, now let's look at a fascinating prediction that falls out of this architectural model. It's an idea that explains a very common, very human frustration that I'm pretty sure you've experienced.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You're lying in bed, your heart is racing, and there's a voice in your head saying there's nothing to be anxious about, just calm down. But you can't. You are fully, completely aware of the feeling, but you're totally powerless to change it. So why does that happen?
Well, the theory explains this with something it calls the awareness manipulation asymmetry. The key idea here is that the brain networks that monitor our internal state, the ones that give us that rich, powerful awareness of anxiety, are totally separate from the networks that exert conscious control. The monitoring systems are ancient and wired for survival. The control systems are newer, slower, and way more general purpose.
And this isn't a bug, it's a feature. From an evolutionary perspective, you want a robust automatic awareness of feelings like fear. Giving a slow, deliberate, conscious mind the power to just switch off the fear of a predator would be a recipe for absolute disaster. This asymmetry is an evolutionary advantage.
So, looking at consciousness from this architectural perspective has some pretty profound implications, especially as we start moving deeper into the age of artificial intelligence.
Because if this theory is right, then consciousness isn't some magical property that we just need to unlock with enough processing power. No, it's a very specific blueprint, one that was forged over billions of years of evolution under real life or death pressure.
And there might be a fundamental physical reason for this. According to the research behind this theory, biological computing, what's happening in your brain right now, is 10 trillion times more thermodynamically efficient than our very best silicon-based systems. It's possible that this incredible efficiency isn't just a nice little bonus, it might be a mandatory requirement for the kind of architecture that consciousness needs to exist at all.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? If consciousness is just a blueprint, can we eventually build it? Or is that inner experience fundamentally tied to a fragile biological body? Is it a state that can't just be programmed, but has to be earned through the genuine struggle for existence?